Our program for the evening is called Tell Me More About the Mark Degree, Neville Barker Cryer. And I thought it would be fitting for tonight, since we had a good amount of companions to go through their Mark degree, and I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit about. So I want to talk more about the author a little bit. So he was a prolific Masonic writer, best known for his accessibility and thoughtful books on Masonic symbolism, ritual, and history. He passed away in 2013. So he's from England, so it's mostly like England oriented. So a lot of it's not going to make sense for what we go through, but I think you can kind of draw the distinction between it. So there's a couple excerpts that he has in this book. He calls them 10-minute talks, and I just kind of want to read it, a couple that I thought really kind of stuck out to me. So the first one I want to read is he talks about the keystone or the plug, right? So if you remember, and by the way, this is all in print. We're not saying anything that can't be said on public domain. This is a public domain facing book. So this is what he has to say about the keystone, or he calls it the plug. One would have thought that there could have been any question in the mind of a Mark Master Mason about the significance of the keystone, or as it is still sometimes referred to as the capestone. Capestone, he wrote, not copestone, C-A-P-E-S-T-O-N-E. Once it has been declared to be missing, there is a likelihood of the completion of King Solomon's temple being delayed as a result. The worshipful master says those unforgettable words, "It is the most important stone in the building. Richly rewarded shall he be who succeeds in discovering it." The full importance of the keystone in the whole fabric of Freemasonry is, however, sadly diminished for most Mark brethren today because of the alterations that have taken place in the ceremonies. In the earliest forms of the Mark rituals, the candidate was either told how the keystone was placed in the final and principal arch of the temple of Solomon, or he was actually directed to carry out such an act as still done in Warwickshire. There even grew up in Irish and military lodges a quite short ceremony regarding this, and due course that became a degree in its own right. It is known as the degree of most excellent master, which is regularly practiced by Mark lodges in the United States of America and Canada. For anyone who takes part in it, it certainly makes an indelible impression on one's memory, and it covers the gap that one can experience when pondering on the Mark ceremony in which we normally take part. I believe that we have lost a vital clue by omitting both the act and the explanation. In the 18th century, the Mark Master Mason degree was directly associated with the degree of the Holy Royal Arch, as is the case in Ireland and Scotland to this day, where it is both requirement by it and precedes it. As a result of separating these two connected stages of Masonry, we have lost the awareness of how the keystone came to be in the arch and why its use was so important. But there will yet be those who wonder what precisely the situation of this arch needing the keystone might be. The answer is that was the arch that spanned the entrance to the Holy of Holies, and over the curve of which was set the dormer that gave light to the same. That is, light for the door and its veil. It was thus in a most important and very sacred part of the building, and when we know this, it can perhaps be better understood why there was such consideration when such an item was said to be missing. The keystone is an architectural item that is produced by the use of the square and compasses in its design. Because we have removed any mention of the link that there once was between the Master Mason and the Mark Master Mason degrees, save for the requirement that a Mark Master must have been through the third degree, it is not surprising that we fail to see the connection with these working implements that are said. In the opening of a lodge in the third degree, to be the proof of a true Master Mason and the work which we can undertake, when we recall that purpose of a Master Mason is to leave the east, where the porchway or the entrance of the inner temple was, and to go to the west, where the Holy of Holies stood, we can even more appreciate why this crowning work of a Mark Master Mason was so essential. What, of course, should never allow us to forget the keystone is the fact that as we greet each other, we are to communicate first a grip, which is meant to allude to the want of a keystone to complete the arch, and then another to remind us of its normal position. The instruction in that act is so brief in the course of so much else that we are taught and shown in the ceremony that is not surprising if, as Mark Master Masons, we easily overlook it. It is worth mentioning here that whilst a keystone has a similar place in the working of our neighboring constitutions, it becomes a different capestone when it appears in the Royal Arch practice. There it becomes a plug stone that is the principal, holding together piece of a dome. That dome was also associated with the Holy of Holies, so its importance in the construction of the temple was just as great as for our keystone. Why it is a capestone for the dome and not the arch is something we can explain here. So then the other one I wanted to talk about, the heave over. You know, that's a piece of junk, throw it over. Well, as was practiced in England, there was a little bit more to that, and it seemed like instead of the overseers doing it, it was more done by the candidate, so that the candidate felt that my work is rejected. The heave over of the keystone. In every degree of Freemasonry, there is a critical moment which we are never likely to forget. They are moments when we are placed in a situation which made us wonder that we allowed ourselves to get into. One of those moments is when we last stand in the northeast part of the lodge room and are invited to exhibit a benevolence that we cannot at moment fulfill, much as we might wish to do so. A similar experience comes when we are standing in full view of all brethren and being asked to reply unaided to a set of questions that it is hoped we have learned correctly through probability not understood. And the third degree has its own dramatic ceremony in which we might well wonder, as we lie entombed, wrapped and just exposed on the lodge floor, what is to happen next. In the marked degree, there is no less poignant moment. We are encountered to submit an unusual piece of work which we have trustingly received in our hands, but which we now being rejected with the somewhat unlikely words, your work is rejected, when in fact we had nothing to do with it. The surprise is certain the greater because the first two people to inspect it, whom you hear called overseers, were apparently willing to permit it. And then, to make the occasion even more painful, you are asked to stand aside while the overseers are questioned and then told to throw the stone that you brought amongst the rubbish. From first coming with this hope that your stone might, like the square and rectangular ones, be used to build the Temple of Solomon, one's feelings are probably now confused and surprised. Confused because the reason for the stone's rejection is not really clear, and surprised because it is presumably put in one's hands for good purpose in the other reason. What exactly in the act of heaving over and is still retained and particularly reenacted in the course of our marked degree? Well, it is certainly something that formed a part of the earliest speculative rituals to which we have access, and so it by no means a late invention of a bright idea. The only major difference from early practice is in the original Hebrew tradition. It was not the stone that was rejected and heat over the edge, but the workman who produced such a faulty piece of work. I mentioned an edge because it should be remembered that the Jerusalem temple was built on a mound above the city, and so there were steep drops on all sides of the site, as indeed there still are. At least we have to be grateful that by the Middle Ages, it is the stone that was carried from the site on the briar, and if it were dead and useless person, then tripped over to amongst the rubble. So basically, what he was saying is they didn't just throw the stone over, they threw the guy over the edge. Like that's the kind of the takeaway is, you know, your work stinks so much, you're going over the edge, right? The search for the stone. When we reach the high point of our ceremony, where the concentration caused by the failure to produce the needed keystone has reached its peak, the worshipful master, as we know, addresses the member with these words: "Let diligent search be made. It is the most important stone in the building." Why is it so important has already been considered in one of the other talks. It has been said, and I can recall the real search that I encountered to make 50 years ago, before ever my attention was drawn to where the stone may have been finally lodged. If there is one portion of the Mark Master ceremony, it has been possible to reveal real change in tradition practice without one mark lifetime in its point. I definitely would check this book out. It's really good. So he has about like 6 or 7 talks, and then he goes into a couple different actual ceremonies. In fact, he talks about here, I thought was pretty cool. There's actually several different songs that they sang. So there was a song that sang before the advancement of prayer. There's a song that sang while the canon is moving to the southwest. There's a song that sang during the sealing of the obligations. There's a song after the heave over. There's a song during the search for the last lost stone. There's a song before the first sign is given, a song before the second sign, and lastly, a sign before the canon is clothed with his apron. So it's a definitely good book. I mean, you could get it anywhere. Tell me more about the mark. So I thought it was fitting to reflect on what we learned. So thank you.